Welcome, Jesters. I know, it's been a while since I've used this background. The LGB International Group made some waves last week when they released their video with testimonials from around the world about basically, well, LGBs, but mostly homosexuals, declaring their independence from the TQ+, the clingers to the end of the alphabet. And, all right, I figured I'd just talk about it. I know I've mentioned a few of these things before, but here's the thing, just to remind everybody, I never really considered myself part of the LGBT community. And previous to that, it was LGB. This came around, by the way, from my memory, not until like 2001. I really don't think anybody was referring to the alphabet before that. Before it was just gay and lesbian. That's it. Then at some point it became LGBT, because I remember the first person to ask me about it. And I think we actually had to look it up, and this was around 2002, I think. So yeah, it has not been around forever. But here's the deal, and here's why this makes sense now, and here's actually why it never really made sense to tack on all of the additional letters, especially recently. Just a little bit of a history lesson. You know, when LGBT came around, it was kind of a sure, but the T meant transsexual, right? Those typically suffering from form of body dysmorphic disorder and who went through a medical transition to become transsexual. In that instance, a transsexual is something you became. It's not something you were or could just decide to be. And they did participate in the community in very low-key ways. You would see transsexuals at the bars and clubs and the parades and everything like that. And they didn't really bother anybody because, quite frankly, where else were they supposed to go? And yes, the gay men in particular have always been a fairly welcoming space. And if you think about it, they either were or are now gay. Not necessarily homosexual, but you could say, gay in that kind of way. So that was fine. Then, when things changed, transsexual became transgender and things just kind of went off the rails. So that's the brief history there. But the fact of the matter is, this actually was never really more than perhaps a social attachment, because homosexuals are, well, we are fundamentally different than anything trans-oriented. We are 100% biologically intact and intentional within the species. I've explained, in another video, the origins or the reasons for homosexuality, and we are meant to be this way. We are born this way. It's not caused by trauma or anything like that. There is nothing wrong with us. And if called to service, yes, we could in fact repopulate the species as we are, right? So we don't need to be changed. And that is a fundamental difference between the T part of the alphabet, and I think we don't really need to be associated with that. It's hard for some people to admit, but that is simply the case, right? And especially today, we are just who we are, and that's it. No need to change, whereas the Q's and most of the T's, and especially the TG's and everything else that comes after that, the two S's and the plus and IAs and whatever all that means, has become more of a social and political identity rather than a biological reality. So we don't really need to be part of that. But I was thinking about this, just to, get my thoughts together, and I realized something. Because we are meant to be. We are humans. We just happen to be homosexual. We are different. And we know this. We absolutely know this. This is not trying to hide it or anything like that. And we're not trying to change ourselves. We know this. And I think this has led to a lot of gays. And this is a huge difference between a lot of other ostensibly, disadvantaged or underprivileged or oppressed minorities or whatever. By the way, I don't feel oppressed in any way, believe me. Because we are different and we know we are, and hopefully people know why we are. People might have different opinions. We don't really dwell on the past the way a lot of other groups tend to. I look at homosexuality as being far more fundamental than any superficial difference, be it just facial composition, skin color, or anything like that. And I think because we know we're different, we don't really have to invent traumas, to explain, our different place in society, because we know we have a different place in society, which makes us not dwell on perhaps past injustices, perceived or real. Yes, we know that it might not have been easy to be out back in, the early part of the century or prior to that, but throughout history, homosexuality has been an accepted part of society. I mean, if the stories and the history that I know about, ancient Greece and Rome and everything like that, it was just there. I don't really remember reading about any problems. So, yeah, maybe I couldn't have been fully out and proud in the 80s, but that's okay. I'm totally fine with that. But, and I'm aware of, maybe not being able to, pursue certain professional careers or anything like that, but not anymore. But I don't dwell on it. That's the past. We've overcome it. Once Oberfell passed, we kind of got everything we wanted, and we actually moved on for the most part. Even the crazy lefty gays, we kind of moved on and detached from the whole political thing because we're good. There was no sense in dwelling on the past. We succeeded, right? There's no sense in dragging up history when it doesn't really affect us now, when we're happy with what we are. And I don't know. I just think that's a very interesting and fundamental difference that we have from a lot of other, forced minority groups. I'll just call them that. We're good. We are good on our own. We don't need anybody else. We don't need, gotta have review the alphabet. We don't need the T or Q or I or A or a plus or 2S or anything like that. We're good on our own. We're happy on our own. And we certainly don't need anyone advocating for us anymore. And it's time that everyone else deal with their own traumas and issue and kind of leave us alone because, we're gonna live our lives like normal people. I suppose I should say normative people, but yeah, just like normal people. I'm right.